and observing things and making adjustments based on observations, I'd like to give some advice around the passing of the catch box. So here's what I would suggest. Pretend that you are shooting a goal in basketball, shooting at the hoop, not doing a chest pass. Okay? Does that make sense? Because if it goes up, somebody has the chance to see it coming down. It also means you need to look up. Okay? All right? So we're going to give that a shot. Do we have anyone who wants to share out a couple of things?
The first statement we had at this table was, why focus on personalized learning just for rural schools? We need it for all of our schools.
You know, we had a similar conversation that oftentimes, whether it's looking at the innovative, I love, Alan, your example of the one-room schoolhouse and how circumstances drive innovation sometimes. And we see this in these one-off places. We often see things that are innovative solutions that have come out of our work with the special ed community, right? That turn out to be great solutions for all. So why can't we learn from these things and then use it for all? So I think that's great. Other thoughts?
Hi,
Okay, great.
Eric from the great state of Oklahoma. So outside of Oklahoma City and Tulsa, where we have some skyscrapers, most of our state is rural, and in their backyards they have grain elevators. So with personalized learning, maybe the panel can offer some suggestions or strategies on professional development in the rural communities targeting personalized learning. A lot of times you'll have a singleton out there who's a maverick, who's doing some wonderful things, but how do you scale that professional development and awareness of personalized learning?
That's great, the scalability there. All right, anybody else before we turn it back over to the panel? All right, there was no tossing. Oh, we have.
I'll use our teacher voice.
No, I want to pass it to you. Hold up, I want to model it.
No, me first. Now that was a football throw. That was not shooting at the basket.
So actually just popcorning off of that idea of how do you get professional development out into the community. I just attended the Council of Great City Schools in Cleveland, and one of the sessions talked about how they're actually introducing personalized learning in several of their districts that were up there. They're talking about personalized learning by teaching the teachers, and they're doing professional development using it so that the teachers, the educators are getting aware of it, comfortable with it, and then they're very familiar and comfortable with passing it on to their students. So that was the way that they were scaling both, and those were urban, but I could also see it working in rural.
Great. I see one of our students is ready to share. Good.
Is it? Okay. Well, I mean, you asked how personalized learning helps us, and I just wanted to point out that it helps us be able to learn as well as teach, and we're able to gain knowledge in a way different way, and it's like evolving in a way. So it's faster, per se. So yeah.
Great. We're going to hear more from the students in a little while. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Todd and the panel.
All right. Well, thank you, Tracy. And thank you to the audience for participating and entertaining yourselves. Go Oklahoma, right? Eric? Good. Excellent. All right. So my esteemed panelists. So what role of our state leaders, whether it's state agency, state education, governor, legislation, what role can they play in fostering more personalized education in the rural areas? Anyone?
Go.
So it looks like it's you and I. Yeah. So you go first.
Okay.
So
All right,
I'm good.
In Vermont, we have, I think, in our smaller session before this one, we talked about sort of taking away those barriers for schools, and I know some people were sharing about sort of pockets of innovation or schools that were allowed to not have particular meet certain requirements or take away barriers for certain schools. I feel like in Vermont we have taken away those barriers for all of our schools. And so we have, from a legislative or a state board perspective, we've gone ahead and done that. I also what I like about our vision of personalized learning in Vermont is that it is very student-centered. We have at the Agency of Education defined our 5 qualities of personalized learning, which include personal relationships, include personalized learning plans, proficiency-based progression, I'll probably forget one, student agency. So we're really focusing on students through personal relationships, student agency. There's one other that's important, I'm sure, but I can't think of it. And so at the same time that we have our leaders have removed some barriers and created space for schools to start innovating in different ways, because schools are doing it in a lot of different ways. We still are lifting up that idea about it being about the student and about student agency and personal relationships with your students. I brought one quote up here that I wanted to read to everyone. One of our principals who has done some really amazing things at her school. Students are on the leadership team, students help determine curriculum, all sorts of things like that. This was she came and did a workshop for me a couple of weeks ago, and in her closing remarks, this is what she said. As educators in this state, you have received a gift. Vermont through legislative action, Vermont through legislative action has adopted a student at the center framework and thus a robust vision of equity in education. So that's hopefully what we have tried to do through our leadership and examples from our leadership, and hopefully we can continue to focus on the student at the center in moving the work forward.
You know, one of the areas, you know, if you're looking at barriers and how maybe the State Department or your local school system, you know, I think the teachers are the ones that really need the help to really relax and use the technology and know how to give up some control in their classroom. And I think that is a vital part of this change. You know, students will be ahead of the game. And I used the example earlier, we were talking about at the table discussion. You know, my youngest son helped me fix a vehicle at my house by pulling up a YouTube video and showed me how to do it. So that kind of, I said, you know, that's pretty smart. Never would have thought about that process, but he did. So I think that's a big one. I also think, especially in our state in Tennessee, we're so test-driven, test accountability heavy, and I think there's a fear in our districts that we have to stay on that goal and that focus, and sometimes we lose focus on student-centered.
So in terms of policy, what states can do with the E-rate program is that they can put up matching funding now that the FCC allows states, if a school district wants to deploy additional fiber optic connections for those schools, and particularly those rural schools, the FCC policy says that if the state puts up 10% of the matching funds to pay for that cost, that the FCC will kick in an additional 10%. And some states are doing that, and it's interesting, it's both Republicans and Democratic governors that are taking advantage of this opportunity. What we don't have yet, unfortunately, is an approval process that really makes sense. So some states have been going to the good effort of putting up their 10% only to find that USAC is rejecting their application, which is a really sore point with us, because the 2014 E-rate reforms were intended to promote rural broadband investment to allow greater personalized learning in schools, and yet it's been so difficult to get approval. About half of the fiber applications have been denied through the E-rate process. So this is something that we're continuing to work on, but I encourage states to who are interested to really work with their legislators on Capitol Hill and the senators and congressmen and congresswomen to really try to help bring some pressure on the FCC and USAC in order to approve more of these applications so we can get more broadband connectivity to these rural schools.
Bo, you want to add anything to that? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so we in Colorado have seen a lot of success at the local level with personalized learning. So an example, East Grand School District, which is in Grand County, mountain rural area, part of Colorado, adopted a Chromebook initiative a couple years ago, and they're now at a point where all of their middle schoolers have access to Chromebooks, and they are able to take advantage of personalized learning through that. And they did that because the local leaders, including in the community, not just in the school, were committed to making that happen. And I think that that process can and should be extended to the state level too. So an example in Colorado, dual and concurrent enrollment is something that was sort of around a few years ago in Colorado, and the governor, the state legislature, the state board of education in 2009 made a commitment to concurrent enrollment, passed new legislation, and since then the Colorado Department of Ed, the Colorado Department of Higher Ed, they're all committed to making concurrent enrollment happen and make it be successful across the state. That includes in the urban areas, but also finding opportunities in rural areas, whether it be at a community college or doing courses online. And so I share that because concurrent enrollment is an example of something that had a lot of potential in Colorado. And now we, a few years later after the legislation, are seeing a lot of success with this. Students are saving thousands of dollars on the cost of college because the leadership in the state was committed to doing it. And so I think the same principle applies with personalized learning, really having the state board, the legislature, and the governor on board with it.
So we've shared some good perspectives and different angles from a connectivity standpoint, from a state strategy standpoint. Is there somebody else or anybody else that we're missing in the conversation regarding expanding the focus on personalized learning in the rural areas? Bo?
So I think as I was thinking about this question, I think it's important for us at the policy level, particularly at the federal level, that we don't think about our policy issues in a vacuum. So folks in this room probably think a lot about Title IV Part A. We do too, but we also understand that the Department of Education is a lot bigger than Title IV Part A. And so as an example, Title IIA for professional development, actually a really big part of personalized learning. Education, innovation, and research grants, a big part of that. Title I funding, a big part of that. And so I think when we're talking about who should be at the table, I think it's everyone who is affected by education, and that is often broader than we think, because if Title II, for example, doesn't receive funding this year, that hurts folks, even if you're not a teacher in the classroom. That's the same with healthcare too, right? There was a lot of concern around efforts around the ACA and what that would mean for the Medicaid expansion. Medicaid feels like a very different issue than personalized learning, but it does affect school budgets pretty significantly. So my recommendation would be to not get siloed off and think of education as part of a bigger whole.
Very good. Anybody else add anything?
I guess I would add again the same theme that bringing students to the table. Again, I'm thinking of some schools in Vermont that's exactly what they've done, and multiple schools. Students are now, like I said before, on leadership teams. They're helping design curriculum. They are going out, and the students are the ones facilitating community dialogues around how they're going to change their schools. We have some nonprofits in the state that are totally centered around developing student voice and student agency. They will work with schools over a course of a year, over a course of a couple of years, to help create school communities where student voice is actually there and heard. We have another example up in what's called our Northeast Kingdom, the most rural part of a rural state. This is a great example. They're trying to figure out, how do we implement personalized learning? And so they created a course for college credit Students and teachers took the course together. All are getting college credit. The course is about personalized learning, and the products of that course will be how that school begins to implement personalized learning. So, I would just add, to me it seems sort of silly if we make these changes and we don't include the students and see, and their thinking, and that would be who I would say to make sure that we include.
That's good. Anything else?
So
John?
maybe I could just add, there's a significant opportunity coming up here next year. So clearly personalized learning is where it's at, right, and where it's going. That's what's needed for the future. And for the rural students, like, they didn't choose to live in these rural areas. They need to have the same opportunities for personalized learning as students elsewhere in the country. And most likely these rural students are going to be engaged in personalized learning online, right? Because there aren't as many subject matter experts in these rural markets that are dealing with smaller schools. So we need to find a way to get these rural schools connected so that the rural students have the same opportunities to engage in personalized learning and the coding that we heard about earlier, which was really fascinating. The opportunity is perhaps coming up with this infrastructure legislation that may be under deliberation in Congress early next year. So we understand the infrastructure from the Trump administration officials that infrastructure is coming after tax reform, and that could be the next initiative. Well, we are working on a component to add broadband funding to that infrastructure legislation. There's a significant opportunity here to shape that broadband component so that it's directed at connecting these rural schools and other anchor institutions to get them the kind of both fiber connectivity and wireless connectivity that they need to engage in this personalized learning that we talked about. So this could be, the SHLB Coalition, we're putting together a cost study to estimate how much money it would take to get all the rural schools and libraries and health providers connected. We're also looking at some lessons learned from the BTOP program. So we're looking to put together, if any of you are interested in joining, we're looking to put together a sort of mini coalition just focused on the possibility of infrastructure legislation that can help to fill in the gaps and really try to carry our rural infrastructure policy forward and be successful so that everybody gets connected. So anybody who's interested, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards.
Alan, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think you're hitting every part of who needs to be at the table. I think involving the local community, because the school is the hub of a lot of the rural community. So I think the students involved, obviously stakeholders in the building, but the community, if you can go to the community with it, this is our mission, vision, this is where we're going to go, they'll be behind the process. And I think you're selling that process to them to help you. So.
Tracy, do we have time for questions you want to take from the audience?
Maybe just one question or two questions, but I did want to hit, I think, on some very important things, and I think, John, you really started to get onto it. A lot of times when we have this conversation around access for rural schools, we definitely start talking about connectivity, and no doubt that is very, very important. But I'm always interested in the so what, right? To what end? Why do we care about getting them connected? And it's not just about having access to high quality content, and that's an important part. But think about one of the other challenges that our rural schools have, and that's access to high quality teachers and getting teachers to move out to some of these most remote places. What do you do when you can't recruit a physics teacher to your area or a world language teacher? What have you? I mean, I imagine there's one teacher in this one-room schoolhouse that has 8 students on 8 different grade levels. What do you do when they may or may not be highly skilled in every single one of the content areas? I mean, this is definitely something that our rural schools face. So I don't want us to forget about that access to the people and the high-quality people. So I don't know if any of you have any thoughts or questions about how you've been able to do that creatively. Access to people.
One thing I used to run our, it was called the Learning Network of Vermont. It was our school-based video conferencing system, and we had 130 schools connected throughout Vermont. through video conferencing, not through, an online class. And unfortunately, that network is no longer, but before it was no longer, one of the last things that I approved some money for was a course for in Chinese for a, believe it or not, it was for an elementary school. So, and Peter knows this, I was a real advocate for learning through video conferencing, for that real live exchange with the teacher, because I think that's important. And that was a great example for me for some of the things that we can do. And I hope that resurfaces in some sort of way in Vermont, models like that.
Please help me in thanking our panel. And